December 21, 1988. Room 113 at the Duchess Hotel in Manhattan. The last room on the left. Behind a door that had been closed for 4 days, housekeeping staff would discover a tragedy that would expose the deadly cost of living authentically in a world that refused to accept difference. Venus Xtravaganza, a 23-year-old transgender woman who had danced her way into immortality through the ballroom scene, lay strangled under a mattress, her dreams of stardom silenced forever. This is the story of a young woman who became an icon through her courage to be herself, and how a society's hatred cost her everything. It's a murder that remains unsolved 36 years later, a life cut short by ignorance, and a legacy that changed the world. Jersey City, New Jersey. 1965. Thomas Pellegatti was born into an Italian-American and Puerto Rican family that loved him but couldn't understand the spirit that lived within him. From an early age, the child who would become Venus Xtravaganza knew that the body they were born in didn't match the soul they carried. In a conservative household where traditional gender roles were strictly enforced, young Thomas felt like a stranger in their own life. But even as a child, there was something undeniably special about them, a fierce beauty, an inner light that refused to be dimmed by circumstances. By the time Venus was a teenager, the pull toward authenticity had become irresistible. She left Jersey City and crossed the Hudson River into Manhattan, where the underground ballroom scene was creating space for people like her, transgender women, gay men, anyone who didn't fit society's narrow definitions of normal. It was in this vibrant, dangerous, beautiful world that Thomas Pellegatti would die and Venus Xtravaganza would be born. In 1983, she joined the legendary House of Xtravaganza, taking the family name that would carry her into history. The ballroom scene wasn't just about voguing and competition, it was about survival, community, chosen family. For Venus and thousands like her, it was the only place in America where being different wasn't just tolerated, it was celebrated. By 1987, Venus had become a star in the ballroom world. She was stunning, charismatic, fierce in every sense of the word. When filmmaker Jenny Livingston began documenting the ballroom scene for what would become Paris is Burning, Venus naturally became one of the central figures. But fame in the ballroom didn't translate to safety on the streets. Venus, like many transgender women in the 1980s, survived through sex work, a dangerous profession made even more perilous by society's violent rejection of transgender people. In the documentary, Venus spoke with startling honesty about the risks she faced every day. She described narrowly escaping an attack by a man who discovered she was transgender during an intimate encounter. The rage, the violence, the murderous hatred she faced simply for existing, it was all captured on film. "I would like to be a complete woman," Venus said in the documentary. "I would like to get married, have children. I want a car, a nice home." Simple dreams that most people take for granted, but for Venus, they seemed almost impossibly distant. What Venus didn't know was that her time was running out. That somewhere in the shadows of New York streets, someone was planning to ensure that her dreams would never come true. Mid-December 1988. The holiday season in New York City, a time when the city should have sparkled with possibility. Venus was still filming scenes for Paris is Burning, still working toward her dreams, still believing that tomorrow might bring the complete transformation she longed for. But Venus was also still surviving through sex work, still navigating the deadly maze of being a transgender woman in Reagan's America. Each encounter was a gamble with her life, and she knew it. On December 17th or 18th, 1988, Venus checked into room 113 at the Duchess Hotel on West 46th Street. It was a cheap, rundown establishment, the kind of place where desperate people went to conduct dangerous business. The kind of place where screams might go unheard and murders might go unnoticed. Venus had been there before. It was part of her survival routine, part of the risk she took every day just to exist in a world that offered transgender women few legitimate opportunities to earn a living. What happened in that room over the next few days would never be fully known. But investigators would piece together enough evidence to understand that Venus had encountered the kind of violent hatred that too many transgender women face. Hatred so intense it leads to murder. 9 a.m., December 21st, 1988. Marco Rios, a housekeeping staff member at the Duchess Hotel, knocked on the door of room 113. No answer. The room had been quiet for days, but the hotel's clientele often kept irregular hours. When Rios entered the room, everything appeared normal at first glance. But something felt wrong. The air was stale, oppressive. And then he looked more carefully at the bed. Venus Xtravaganza's body had been hidden under the mattress, bound and strangled. Medical examiners would later determine that she had been dead for 3 to 4 days, meaning she had been murdered just days before Christmas, while the rest of the city prepared for celebration. The crime scene told a story of violence and hatred. Venus had been bound, suggesting she had been restrained before being killed. She had been strangled, indicating a prolonged, personal attack. And her body had been hidden, showing that her killer had tried to conceal the crime. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong or a crime of passion in the traditional sense. This was the methodical murder of a transgender woman by someone who saw her very existence as an offense worthy of death. In 1988, the New York Police Department's approach to investigating the murder of a transgender sex worker was, to put it charitably, inadequate. Venus's death was classified as a homicide, but the investigation lacked the resources, commitment, and cultural understanding necessary to solve such a case. The detectives assigned to the case faced genuine challenges. Venus lived on the margins of society, in a community that had learned not to trust law enforcement. Potential witnesses were reluctant to come forward, either out of fear for their own safety or skepticism about police commitment to justice for people like Venus. But the investigation also reflected the broader societal attitude toward transgender people in the 1980s. Venus's murder wasn't seen as a priority case. She wasn't considered a real victim in the way that a cisgender woman from a middle-class background might have been. The institutional indifference was devastating. Evidence went uncollected. Witnesses weren't properly interviewed. The case went cold not because it was unsolvable, but because the system never truly tried to solve it. For 36 years, Venus's family, both biological and chosen, have lived with the knowledge that her killer walked free, that justice was denied not just to Venus but to an entire community of vulnerable people. In 1990, 2 years after Venus's murder, Paris is Burning was released to critical acclaim. The documentary that had captured Venus in life now immortalized her in death, introducing the world to the vibrant, dangerous, beautiful ballroom culture that had been her sanctuary. Venus became an icon posthumously. Her image, her voice, her fierce presence on screen inspired millions of people around the world. She became a symbol of authenticity, courage, and the deadly cost of living truthfully in an unaccepting world. The cruel irony wasn't lost on anyone who knew Venus personally. She had dreamed of fame, of being seen, of being celebrated for who she was. She achieved all of that, but only after death had silenced her voice forever. Paris is Burning launched conversations about gender, sexuality, and acceptance that continue to this day. Venus's contribution to the film helped change how America understood transgender identity, but she never got to see the impact of her courage. Her brother Louis later said that Venus had popularized the phrase, fierce, a word that has since become synonymous with strength and authenticity. Even in death, Venus was still giving language to people who needed words to describe their own power. Venus's murder left behind 2 grieving families, her biological family in Jersey City and her chosen family in the House of Xtravaganza. Both groups would spend decades fighting for recognition, for justice, for some acknowledgement that Venus's life had mattered. Her biological family, led by her brothers, worked to preserve her memory and keep her case in the public eye. They spoke to journalists, cooperated with documentarians, and refused to let Venus become just another forgotten victim of anti-transgender violence. The ballroom community, meanwhile, made Venus into a legend. Her name became synonymous with courage and authenticity. New generations of transgender people found inspiration in her story, even as they mourned the violence that had ended her life. In recent years, both families have come together in a renewed push for justice. The 2024 documentary, I'm Your Venus, brought together Venus's biological brothers and her ballroom family in a joint effort to reopen her cold case and find her killer. The collaboration represents something beautiful, the healing power of shared grief and common purpose, bringing together families that might otherwise never have connected. In 2024, more than 3 decades after Venus's murder, new efforts began to solve her case. Advances in forensic science, changes in police attitudes toward LGBTQ+ victims, and pressure from advocacy groups have combined to give Venus's case new life. The Transgender Task Force, an organization dedicated to solving murders of transgender people, has assisted with Venus's case. They bring modern investigative techniques, cultural competency, and the kind of commitment that was lacking in the original investigation. DNA analysis that wasn't available in 1988 might now be able to identify Venus's killer. Witness testimony that was never properly collected might still be obtained. Evidence that was overlooked or misunderstood might finally yield answers. The renewed investigation represents more than just hope for Venus's family. It represents a fundamental change in how society values transgender lives. Venus's case is no longer being treated as the murder of a disposable person, but as the killing of someone whose life had value and whose death demands justice. But even with modern techniques and renewed commitment, solving a 36-year-old murder remains a daunting challenge. The killer might be dead, witnesses might have died, and crucial evidence might be lost forever. Today, Venus Xtravaganza's childhood home at 343 1/2 8th Street in Jersey City has been designated as a historic landmark, a recognition that would have seemed impossible in 1988, when transgender people were largely invisible in mainstream society. The designation represents how far society has come in understanding and accepting transgender people. Venus's story, once marginalized and ignored, is now recognized as an important part of American history. But landmarks and documentaries, while important, cannot bring Venus back or undo the violence that ended her life. They cannot give her the family she dreamed of, the complete womanhood she longed for, the safety she deserved. Venus was buried at Holy Cross Cemetery in North Arlington, New Jersey. Her grave has become a pilgrimage site for transgender people seeking inspiration from someone who lived authentically despite the deadly consequences. The visitors who come to pay their respects understand something that Venus's killer never could, that living truthfully requires a courage that most people will never have to demonstrate, and that Venus's decision to be herself despite the risks makes her a hero, not a victim. 36 years after Venus Xtravaganza was murdered in room 113 of the Duchess Hotel, her killer remains free. Someone walked away from that hotel room after committing one of the most senseless murders in New York City's history, and they have never faced consequences for their actions. The person who killed Venus might be dead by now, might be living quietly somewhere, might even be watching this very documentary. They took the life of a young woman whose only crime was being true to herself, and they have never been held accountable. But Venus's legacy extends far beyond her unsolved murder. She helped introduce the world to the ballroom scene, a culture that has fundamentally influenced modern concepts of gender, performance, and authenticity. She popularized language and attitudes that have empowered millions of people to live more honestly. The world Venus dreamed of, where transgender people could live safely, openly, with dignity and respect, is slowly becoming reality. It's not there yet, and transgender people still face violence and discrimination. But progress is being made, and Venus's courage contributed to that progress. Her death also serves as a stark reminder of the work that remains to be done. In 2024, transgender people, especially transgender women of color, still face disproportionate rates of violence. Venus's murder wasn't an isolated tragedy, it was part of a pattern of violence that continues today. The Duchess Hotel where Venus died has long since closed, but room 113, the last room on the left, remains a symbol of society's failure to protect its most vulnerable members. It represents a murder that should have been solved, a life that should have been preserved, a dream that should have been fulfilled. Venus Xtravaganza wanted simple things: to be a complete woman, to get married, to have children, to feel safe walking down the street. She wanted what most people take for granted: the right to exist without fear, to love without shame, to dream without reservation. She never got those things in life, but her death has helped make them more possible for others. The documentary that made her famous, the landmark designation that honors her memory, the ongoing investigation into her murder, all of these represent a world slowly learning to value people like Venus. Justice for Venus Xtravaganza isn't just about solving her murder, though that remains crucial. It's about creating a world where transgender people can live safely, where being different isn't a death sentence, where room 113 represents the last place someone like Venus ever died simply for being herself. The investigation continues. The hope for answers persists. And somewhere in the evidence, in the witnesses, in the determination of people who refuse to let Venus be forgotten, justice may still be waiting to be found. Venus Xtravaganza deserved better from the world. She deserved safety, acceptance, and the chance to become the complete woman she dreamed of being. She deserved justice when she was murdered, and she deserves justice now. The last room on the left has been empty for 36 years. But Venus's story lives on, and with it, the hope that someday, someone will be held accountable for silencing one of the most authentic voices of her generation.